Hello, welcome back to How to RPG. Today it's all about the game rules, the basic combat game rules. We're going to be doing some demonstration and some explanation. I will be jumping back and forth from the battle mat, miniatures and dice as I demonstrate to my face so I can explain the kind of like the pros and cons of different techniques. We're going to be looking at one aspect of combat and at the basic level rather than some of the more complicated things that you could do. In any case, I'm hoping that you're going to enjoy this. My suggestion is grab some food, some drink, make sure you're comfortable, be prepared to share your own ideas. I'm going to put forward a poll. Take part in the poll if you feel like you want to. If you don't, that's fine, you don't have to. Fred Hubber, welcome. Fred Hubber is a patron. Thank you for being here. Okay, I'm just about ready to go and we'll get started. Here, where is this? That's the screen here. Yes, that one there. Okay. Hi, welcome to How to RPG. My name is Fred Wheeler, and today I want to talk about the basic combat rules of your tabletop role-playing game. And the idea is to look at the variant rules that you could use. So I'm hoping this will be like a series. We'll keep rolling back to this every month. We'll go over basic combat rules that you could use that are variant options rather than just using the standard ones that you're using in whatever role-playing game you're playing right now. There will be a very heavy focus on a D20 system, but also not necessarily as well, because there's a lot of ways you can do stuff. And I thought what would be really interesting is to actually start at the very beginning when it comes to combat. Why not start with initiative, or should I say turn order, because initiative is actually just a technique or method for performing your turn order. And I thought the best way to do this is to present. I've got 8 different methods I want to talk to you about and present to you, and I also want to go over the different pros and cons. I'm foreseeing that in the future what I will do is I will cover different ways of making attacks, different ways of dealing with sort of the generics around your basic combat stuff, all the things that you would normally sort of do in any kind of system. There's usually re-rolls, advantage, disadvantage. We've talked about that sort of thing. And I'm probably going to talk about inspiration in the future, which is also just another version of hero points, action points. There are various ways that it's described, okay? How's it going, the Cax Max? I use Dungeon Master discretion all of the time in my game, so I don't need a simple rule system to do that. I like GURPS so because of all the house rules have been written and place tested for me. Like everybody has their own particular way, and the reason this exists is to... How's it going, Big Kid? Big Kid is also a patron. Welcome. The reason is that we do this is that I want you to be able to sort of adjust your game. Okay, so let's get straight into the first one. And by all means, feel free to share in the chat your particular method that you use. And I'm going to go over the first one that I have for you. And the first one is probably my favorite way of approaching any kind of turn order. And that is make it super simple. How do you make it super simple? Well, the easiest way to make it super simple is to go clockwise or anti-clockwise. One of the easiest ways to deal with combat is to simply say, okay, we're going to use a determination of if you go clockwise around the table or you go anti-clockwise around the table, that's how we'll do it. Now, sometimes you might start with a particular person. Maybe you'll start with the game master or dungeon master. Maybe you'll start with a particular person sitting in the hot seat, whatever that might be. But it's the simplest way. It is so quick and easy. And it's as simple as that. But there are some problems with a system where you just decide to go clockwise or anti-clockwise. And the first thing you'll notice is, well, with a complicated system that has lots of specialty features like Dungeons and Dragons 5e and even 4e, and it probably could be applied to Pathfinder, you have these features that the characters possess, or the monsters possess, but quite often the player characters possess, that are dependent on initiative. They're dependent on where you take your turn in the initiative but also too, they're keyed to last a certain amount of time. So if the idea is you trigger this ability, you get this effect, but it only lasts for one round, and it will end at the end of your next turn. And of course, if suddenly you're just going around this way, you don't feel like you've got quite as much control. It's not as bad as it might seem, but it does feel like you don't have quite as much control. Because when you have features like that, the idea is to try to have some way of being the person who goes first, because you want it to have the greatest effect for the longest period of time. And sometimes it's very difficult to dissect features that work like that are very dependent on the turn order, when you didn't simply pick a direction, go anti-clockwise or clockwise. Another problem is, unless you're sitting at a table and you're in person, going clockwise and anti-clockwise is a bit difficult. If you're playing on Zoom, how do you do that? Well, it's actually not so bad, because you can select a person and simply pick a direction on the whatever you've done. If you laid everybody out in order, if you're playing in sort of like gallery mode, then you can just do it that way. It's reasonably easy. But there are some problems with it. A lot of people don't like going clockwise and anti-clockwise, and I find this to be the case with players most of the time. Game masters usually don't have too much of an issue, and that is because suddenly they're used to rolling dice or using a modifier and adding that to their dice roll, or having a modifier, and they've worked very hard to try to figure out how to make that number as big as possible. And players like rolling dice when it comes to taking their turn. And, the terminology, roll initiative it's one of the most common things that people say for certainly a D20 system, and probably more people playing D20 systems than anything else, and probably more people playing Dungeons and Dragons. So to get people away from that is very, very difficult. But at its core, it's fast. It gets you into the battle. You're not waiting for people to roll numbers and stuff like that and figure out the order. Okay, you can tell, everybody knows exactly who's going to be going next, because you can see who's taking their current turn, and then you can tell from where you're positioned who's going to go next. So it's a great system, but getting people to use it, that's another problem in itself. I want to go over another one that's really simple. I'm going to get more and more complicated. The further and further we go, we're going to get more and more complicated, if you hadn't figured it out. I'm starting with the simple stuff. So Fred Hubbard has mentioned here that the simpler the rule system, the more DM's discretion is available, and the more you can use the rule of cool where it sounds good. I'd agree. This is why I created Mazes and Monsters. It is in its second draft, and it is basically a retro clone, or a clone of Dungeons and Dragons, with everything that I didn't think you need stripped away. Okay, it's done deliberately that way. So for those of you who are like, and the reason for doing that is to make it easy and fast for a new person to play the game, but also for kids to play the game. But also it allows you as game masters and your group to tack on more rules, to attach more variant rules. If you strip away more, you can put more on. Okay, if you already have too much stuff attached, then it's very difficult to add additional things in place. The Cax Max has got a different approach here. Thank you for sharing it. GURPS, yes, I see your comment. Next, my variant rule on initiative is 2-minute egg timer at the beginning of each round. Players can discuss then, during each player's turn, that player makes all the choices for their PC. Okay, so you have a initial have a discussion amongst yourselves as a 2-minute timer. Now, I've used timers before. For those people who are wondering how to speed up your initiative or your turn order, I've used minute timers and half-minute timers, 30-second timers. You can do that sort of thing if you think that's going to work for you. It really depends. Some people are fine with it. Some people struggle. There are certain players they need a lot of time to process. They can't take their time, their turn very quickly. So you need to allow them more time to actually process. And they struggle if you put the timer in front of them. It actually makes it worse for them. So yeah, there are ways of getting around that, and don't worry, we'll get to that. Okay, what else you got here? AD&D had bonus and penalty for initiative based on weapon used and armor of opponent. It was a mess, and till we started ignoring it. So yeah, there are a lot of. We're going to go over some of the more complicated initiative systems, but yes, I hadn't I hadn't really paid attention to that one, Fred. I certainly wasn't going to talk about it. I kind of felt like there's a certain things we can avoid. Anyway, let's look at the next one that I want to discuss. So that's your clockwise, anti-clockwise. You can also determine your turn order by just flipping a coin. If you really want to make things simple, just flipping a coin to determine who goes first. So you get your coin, you flip your coin, you get a result. I got a tails. So what does that mean? If I get a head on the actual coin, the players are going to go first. If I get tails on the coin, the game master or dungeon master goes first. And you're probably thinking, oh, hang on, but what about the players? Like, who's going to go, even if we decide, okay, I've got a tails, the game master's going first and all the players will take their turn after. What's the order of the players? It's whoever decides to say something first. It's as simple as that. It's one of the easiest ways to deal with it. It really doesn't matter, whether you realize it or not, it doesn't really matter where the players take their turn ultimately. Because if you treat them as like a group, they can plan amongst themselves who's going to go first and who's going to go second, who's going to go third, and based on the fact that some of them are going to be able to make a decision faster than others. The great thing about flipping a coin and simply splitting up your turn order into players and game master is that because the players are now just a group who now can adjust where they're going to take their turn. If you have a turn-based feature or an initiative-based feature, which is very dependent on where you position yourself, that means if you want to have the maximum effect, you would take your turn first. If you're going to cast a spell that creates an area effect and it lasts for one round and will end at the end of your next turn, then that's a good thing to have, right? Like, I can now go first. It also means if you're a wizard and you wanted to be able to lay down fireball before the fighters or melee combatants rush in, then now you can. You've left that open for the players to actually explore as an option. Rather than being tied to, no, actually, everybody else is going to run in and I just happen to get really low on the turn order, and as the wizard, where I wanted to drop an area effect spell, I'm going to wind up affecting all of the rest of the party. And if that's the case, then I don't want to cast that spell anymore. So it gives them a lot more options. They get to actually do some strategic and tactical thought around what they're going to do in their battle. It also means that those people who are really, really slow will usually go last in the turn order. So even if I rolled a tails on my coin, and that means, okay, the game master goes first and then the players go next, the people that are more organized and more ready to take their turn will take their turn first. And those people who need a bit more time to process and figure out what they're doing, they'll go last. And actually, you'll find that your round for your combat is actually not too bad. It's actually going to resolve itself fairly quickly. It's one of the reasons why I think group initiative systems work really well. And flipping a coin and just dividing your game into game master and players is an easy way of doing that. Super simple. I mean, going clockwise and anti-clockwise is great because you still got that set turn order. But if you've got a group who can cope with the fact that some of them are going to going last, some of them are going first, depending on how fast they make decisions. It's really up to what works for you and what works for your players, as far as I'm concerned. So I wanted to present that because it's been out there forever. Like, it's not a new idea. You can apply it to just about any kind of game whatsoever. It doesn't have to be Dungeons and Dragons. It doesn't have to be a D20 system. You just flip a coin and away you go. What do you got here, Fred? You can see the players in initiative bonus order around the table, and then most of the time the rolls will match the order of the players' seating. So you actually bring up another thing I wanted to discuss. We're going to get to that, okay? Because I've tried this. It's not very popular, but I'm going to still present it to you. So there is another way you can deal with turn order, and that is when you decide that you're going to have a battle. Like how do you when is it that you need to have the turn order determined? Well, it's usually a product of somebody did something. Somebody initiated the battle. So one of the easiest ways to actually determine your turn order for a battle is whoever was the initiator, whoever started the fight, whoever did something that was aggressive, they go first. Okay? Now that might be a bit of a problem if you have people who like to jump in there and say quickly, up, I pull out my arrow and fire it, or I swing my sword and try to cut off their head. Okay? So it then becomes a race to see who can say something first. But whoever initiated some sort of aggressive action probably should be going first. It would make sense narratively. And we wind up losing that when we don't do that. So that might mean that the venom troll here will take their turn, along with the swarms, if they do something that's aggressive. Or if the players decide to attack first, then they will go first. Whoever actually initiated that particular action, maybe it's the barbarian, moves up and decides to try and smack one of the swarms of snakes. Okay, so there are some good things and there's some bad things with a system like this. One, when you decide, okay, we're going to start with whoever initiated the fight, you have that, as I had mentioned before, that rush to see if you can say something before anybody else, okay? But narratively, it makes sense. You don't wind up with mechanics being rolled up or turn order being determined that doesn't make sense, because there is a strange thing that can happen in a turn order, particularly with initiative. If you've used Dungeons & Dragons initiative, where you add a bonus to a 20-sided dice roll, you'll notice there's these weird times where the barbarian says, I swing my axe at the troll. That's the thing that started the fight. Game Master says, roll initiative. And then everybody rolls initiative, and what do you know it? The barbarian gets a 3 for their initiative, and they wind up at the bottom of the initiative order. And everybody else is going first, yet their action was the first thing that started the whole ball rolling. It makes more sense that the barbarian should go first, right? And we have this strange break in narrative. So you don't have that problem when you start with the person who initiated it. The other thing I suppose a lot of people are thinking is, okay, so we start with the first person who initiated it, or the monster who initiated it, then what about the rest of everybody else? It doesn't matter after that. Honestly, at that point, you can use any kind of turn order, or you can use initiative after that. It's one of the best ways to deal with the problem. I actually think in many respects, if you're going to use Dungeons & Dragons initiative, you should always go with whoever initiated the fight goes first. Everybody else rolls initiative, okay, including the person who performed the action, but you ignore the position and the initiative for the person who initiated the fight, or the monster who initiated the fight, because they will always go first. But everybody else just takes their turn in the order that you've rolled up, okay? And that's one of the easiest ways to get around all that hassle, and you don't wind up with those huge breaks in narrative. Again, a system like this feels like it underplays people who have turn order or initiative-based abilities and features, but honestly, I don't believe that it does. I think it actually makes far more sense to work that way than any other way. I've heard the arguments before. I'll sometimes let the initiator have their action, then go into initiative. Yes, so Fred Hubbard's describing exactly what I'm talking about. Okay? All right. The next one on my list here, we're going to get a little bit more complicated, and I think, Fred, you had already kind of mentioned this. It's going to be kind of obvious from what you see in front of you right now. So, pardon me. We can also place everybody in initiative or into their turn order based on their ability or skill modifier. So if you're using initiative as a skill, or you're using your dexterity modifier, okay, the dexterity ability modifier, if you're using that in your game, and you just order it highest to lowest, okay? And you don't worry about rolling a dice. So you don't have to worry about people rolling a dice. That means that their initiative is pretty much going to be stable the whole time. You don't have to jump back and forth. It is essentially the same system. So that means if the rogue has a 3, they'll be at the top. And if the wizard has a 2 for their dexterity modifier, then they'll go there. Or if it's their initiative score, or initiative bonus or modifier. Forget about score. Okay, fighter, if they've got a 1, then it will go here. And they'll pretty much be in the same position every time you start a fight. The cleric, they've got no dexterity or initiative bonus, so they've got a 0, so they'll go here. And then we roll up. We don't have to roll up for the Game Master. We just have to decide, okay, all right, what's the dexterity bonus or modifier or the initiative bonus or modifier for our troll? Well, our troll has actually got a 1. Okay, so we've got a 1. So that means we need to place them in that order. So they're somewhere in here. But we have a problem because the fighter also has a 1. So how do you resolve that? It's very simple. You get the player to roll a 20-sided dice, and you get the Game Master to roll a 20-sided dice. Just like so. So Game Master rolls a 16. Okay, that's for the Game Master. And the fighter rolls their dice, and they get an 18. Well, they got higher. So we've just determined who goes first. Fighter will be going first, even though they've got the same dexterity bonus or initiative bonus, and then the cleric will be going last. The great system, or great way about this is you've only got 2 people ever rolling dice. So you don't have to wait for calculations and adding up. You don't have to worry about everybody giving you feedback about what their initiative score is. It's already kind of figured out for you. What I have unfortunately found is a system like this doesn't allow for much variation. Okay, so you don't see, it means that the rogue, as a general rule, will always be going most of the time at the top. It also means the cleric will almost always be going at the bottom. And it's only the Game Master, dependent on the monster, who is going to be shifting around. So you don't have to do a lot of extra work. So it's great in terms of that for the Game Master. The problem is with a system like this is people who have played Dungeons and Dragons, you know, whether it be 3.5, version 3, version 4, version 5, they're so used to rolling for initiative and rolling a 20-sided dice and adding a bonus that when you suddenly say, just tell me what your bonus is or your modifier is for your dexterity or your initiative and don't worry about rolling dice, they get very upset. I can tell you, I've tried it before, and as soon as you take that dice roll away, they get really, I had about half the group just get super angry, like just lose their nut, like they were furious. And it was like, you've gone and taken something away from the game that we had there before. Another thing that can kind of crop up is if you have feats or special bonuses or features from classes or races that give you a bonus to your initiative modifier or your initiative bonus or your dexterity in some way, then they will tend to wind up doing better. So if you were dealing with something like the alert feat where you get a +5, right, getting a +5 on added to that initiative that you have already, that means you're pretty much going first all the time. You're almost guaranteed it's always going to be the case, okay? And you could say, well, they did spend a feat to get it, but it does do that. But honestly, it saves a lot of time, the transition from one to the other. I guess the thing is, out of all the things I'm going to show you today, I'm going to say I actually personally, as a game master, find it really useful. But I probably would never use it again, and the reason being is the reaction by players is usually really bad. It's really, really bad. So I want to warn you against using that system. For me, maybe it'll work for your group, but if you decide to put this in place and you get a backlash that's quite strong from a good portion of your group, then just forget about it. There are other ways of dealing with it that don't have that kind of backlash. The worst backlash I've ever had is using this system, honestly. But I still think it has a lot of merit because you don't have to worry about constantly reordering everybody. Hi Luna, how you doing? I like the rule of ICRPG. Yes, everyone rolls, and who rolls the highest gets to go first, then go clockwise. Yep. So there's no adding dice. You just have to figure out who's going to roll the highest number. I guess the only problem is if you have a stalemate. Somebody rolls the same number, right? If you have somebody rolling off like that way, and somebody gets a 20 and somebody else gets a 20, or if you're rolling six-sided dice and both people, two people get a six, then you've got like a stalemate. So I guess you have to do a roll off like to break that tie. I am always a fan of rolling dice, but there is a something to be said for moving things forward. Yeah, I always find the worst aspect of getting a battle moving is initiative. It's the greatest hurdle. It's why I tend to, if we do use rolling, traditional Dungeons and Dragons rolling initiative, if we ever do use that, and we often do, I'll get them to roll all of their initiatives for the entire battles all up in front before we start the session. So I don't have to fiddle around waiting for them to roll dice. As we're setting up and people are dropping in, okay, I'll say roll two initiative, make two initiative rolls, and I'll take down those numbers for each player. Or make three initiative rolls, and I'll take down those numbers. And I'll just use them when I'm ready. So I don't have to wait for people to roll the dice and add it together and find their dice and just muck around and like, oh my God, you got to be kidding. I'm going to go fall asleep sometime soon. But yeah, I just wanted to at least mention that system and at least kind of warn you away from it, actually. The Cax Max, what do you got here? GURPS uses basic speed based on dexterity and health stats and only rolls when there's specific circumstances. D&D could do the same with dex or intelligence. Intelligence or dexterity. Similar. Yep, you probably could. Okay, the next one on my list. Where is it? I have done this one. Okay. Rolling a 20-sided dice. You're probably all familiar with this one. Pardon me. So, this is the thing that everybody knows about, right? This is the one that everybody's familiar with. And this is initiative. Rolling for initiative. This is where you roll your 20-sided dice and you add your modifier, whatever that might be. That's usually your dexterity modifier or an initiative modifier or bonus. And then you add those two numbers together, you get a result, and then you place everybody into order from highest to lowest. And it's been around a while. It's been used for yonks. Let's say if I roll for the rogue, there's a 13. Rogue gets 13, but then we add our 3 and we get 16. And we just do that for every single person. Nothing wrong with the system in itself, as long as everybody can do it quickly. And that's unfortunately not the case. In many cases, I find using traditional initiative that is used in Dungeons and Dragons with a D20 system never gets the results that I really want, which is I want fast play. I want to get on with it. I like combat, but I want to get it done quickly. I don't want to muck around. And unfortunately, that doesn't get achieved. I almost find that the traditional initiative is one of the worst aspects of the game if you are trying to run quick combat. If you don't care about that sort of thing, then it's not an issue. Here's the problem that I find is, one, getting rid of it for a game master reduces workload, increases speed of play, gets everything going faster, which is great. And the more, if you have 2 or 3 battles in your game session, that's 2 or 3 times everybody's got to roll initiative, and it always burns up a lot of time. Now you might say, well, it's not a problem if you play on a virtual tabletop because you just press a button. But even people pressing buttons sometimes takes too long. Okay, you still have to compile all that information for yourself as a game master, even if you're using virtual tabletop. The biggest problem is the system is the most popular amongst players. players love rolling a dice. Like if you say to somebody who's playing any kind of game, you can roll a dice. It's like it triggers that little part in your brain that likes to gamble. Okay, we all have some part in our brain that has a sort of a reward and punishment chemical that's being released. Okay, a chemical that's released when we are punished, a chemical that's released when we are rewarded for our behavior. And this, rolling the dice, triggers those chemicals. So when we get the dice result that's high, if we want a high number, and that's the result we want, we get a reward. There's a little bit of a chemical that releases in our brain. It says, wow. And so that makes us happy. And when we get a low number, we don't feel so happy. Okay, we feel sad. Okay, we're not quite so happy about our result. So it buys into the human behavior of gambling. And this is the problem, is that like it's very easy for people to fall into this because we're kind of set up chemically and biologically like that. So that means that rolling a 20-sided dice, adding a bonus, is the most desirable way to go. Now, it doesn't have to be a 20-sided dice, but it has to be some sort of dice, some sort of randomizer, something that we don't know the result to, because we're anticipating and hoping for that good result, you know? So with a system like that is so well, and this is why it's remained. For those of you who are unaware as to why do we still use a 20-sided dice and then add a bonus to our number for our initiative and taking turns, it's because it plays on the biology of the human brain. It rewards players mentally, you know, they like that sort of thing, they're going to keep doing it. You can't fault them for their own biology. The only problem is that there's a wide variation. Like when you roll a 20-sided dice and you add your bonus, you could get a 1, you could get a 20. So even if you've got a reasonably good modifier or bonus for your initiative, the problem is that you're still dependent on not rolling a 1, because if you get a 1, you're probably going last. And if you get a 20, you're probably going to be going first. That tends to be the case, unless you're dealing with very large modifiers or bonuses that you add to that 20-sided dice. So yeah, this is why we still use it. This is why it's very hard to get players to accept a different system of turn order. So if you were wondering why you couldn't do that, it's because you're fighting their biology. And sometimes you can't fight biology, you have to go with it. But it is by far, in my opinion, the most antiquated system. But yeah, you know, Wizards of the Coast and Paizo and Kobold Press, and you know, most publishers know that having a rolling system for taking turns is desirable. Now, there's another way of getting around that, and that's replacing your 20-sided dice. And as somebody had mentioned before, you could replace your 20-sided dice with a smaller dice or a bigger dice. You could roll a 10-sided dice. You could roll a 6-sided dice. And that will still give them what they kind of want, which is, I'm looking to get a good number. And they still get to roll dice, but you're not dealing with a D20. Eliminating the bonus, again, is a problem if you decide to do that, because just rolling a 20-sided dice and having a flat roll and no bonus, very hard for people to accept that, because they feel like they're losing out on something. Okay, I want to move on to the next one. Let's see, where is it? Here we go. Now this is this is where we're getting into the weeds, unfortunately, and that is when you start using different dice for your initiative. I know you're probably thinking, a few of you who are reasonably familiar with older versions of the game will know exactly what I'm talking about. And those of you who haven't really played that many game systems or haven't been around that long, you're probably wondering, what the heck is he on and what is he talking about? What I actually mean is, depending on the type of character that you have, you'll roll a different type of dice. There's no bonus involved. You simply roll the dice. And when you roll the dice, whatever the result is, that determines your number, and the highest numbers go at the top, lowest numbers go at the bottom. So how does that look? Well, if you are potentially, say, a spellcaster, you'll roll probably a four-sided dice because it's assumed that casting a spell is harder to do and takes longer. Or maybe you roll a six-sided dice instead of a four-sided dice. So spellcasters roll a four-sided dice or a six-sided dice depending on what kind of spell they're going to cast. But if you're not a spellcaster, you're going to get a different dice to roll. You're going to get an 8-sided dice to roll, or potentially a 10-sided dice to roll. Okay, it'll be one of those, and for heavy weapons, you'll have to roll, or two-handed weapons, you would roll a 10-sided dice, and for any kind of single-handed weapons, you roll an 8-sided dice. Now, the great thing about this is it means that those who are martial characters get a pretty significant boost in the chance of going first. And those who are spellcasters who potentially have really powerful and game-breaking spell effects will be going last because they're more likely to roll low. Because the average roll on a four-sided dice is going to be about 2.5, and the average roll on a six-sided dice is going to be about 3.5, and then your average roll on your 8-sided dice is about 4.5. I mean, you might say these are small numbers. It's a tiny increment. And 5.5 on a 10-sided dice. This actually goes right back to, in many respects, down to BECMI Dungeons & Dragons or basic D&D. And it's kind of quite smart. It also means that you generally know what dice you're going to use, You almost always know what dice you're going to use. And you don't add a bonus to it. It's just whatever you roll on the dice. But every different class is going to have a different sort of dice. It's going to be one of those four. You don't have to worry about them figuring out and adding stuff together. That's always nice. Now, I haven't used a system like that until just recently. And I thought I would hate it. I thought I would despise the fact that, I would get a, smaller dice to roll than somebody else because I was a spellcaster. And actually, no, that was not the case. I actually felt like it was fine. I didn't actually think too much about it. I'm not every person, right? So I think the benefits are, one, it kind of makes the different classes stand out. It makes a lot of sense sort of narratively too. It's going to be a big jump for people who are used to the D20 roll initiative system. But it also, let's get real. Most of the time, martial characters in Dungeons and Dragons and to a certain extent, most role-playing games, they kind of get the shaft quite a lot, don't they? And so this actually makes it more likely they can do what they need to do. It doesn't really allow for the players to actually move things around and adjust when they're going to go. You might be thinking, okay, so how does it work if you're doing the monsters? Well, monsters would operate the same way. If you have a monster that is casting spells, they'll be rolling a 4-sided dice or a 6-sided dice because it takes them longer, it's a bit more complicated. Whereas if you have a troll that's just whacking you with a stick, then you're going to be rolling an 8-sided dice, and if they're using a 2-handed maul, they'll be using a 10-sided dice. So the same thing would apply to your game master or dungeon master as to your players. I actually like that as a system. I think it's really, really smart. But if you're dealing with like young kids, they're going to get confused for sure. But if you like nuance, this kind of gives you a bit of nuance, doesn't it? And you don't have to be reliant on just bonuses. And you're dealing with much smaller dice rolls. You're not dealing with a 20-sided dice roll. And as I had mentioned before, 20-sided dice rolls kind of throw things out of whack a little bit, don't they? Okay. There are two more systems that I want to suggest, and I'm going to say right now, let's just forget about rolling dice altogether. And let's just decide that there's going to be a way of doing this every single time. And I'm going to run these two systems together so you can sort of see. And that is, we decide that because we want our monsters to do something, and if you're only getting between 1 and 3 rounds before the battle's over, you want your monsters to do something cool before they get trounced or pulverized. depending on the system, if you're dealing with a system that's very deadly, then that would be a bad thing. But if you haven't got a system that isn't really deadly, then just have the Game Master go first. Like every time you start you start your turn order, it's the Game Master will go first, and everybody else will go after. That's it. It's really simple. There's no mathematics, and then of course your players will organise themselves as they see fit, but the Game Master goes first. Okay, and we kind of fall back to having a group initiative for the players. They will decide amongst themselves who's going to go first or second or third or whatever, or fourth. So that's the Game Master going first. Or you can have a system where, no, it's quite deadly. We actually need the players to go first. So the Game Master always goes last. So that means the troll will always make its attacks last. So that means that the player characters can organise themselves as they see fit, decide who's going to go first, second, third, fourth. And then the Game Master will take their turn once everybody else has for that round. Now there are some problems with this system, and it should be abundantly clear what they are, but I'm going to spell them out. How's it going, Prepare, Cook and Survive? How's it going, Itchy? So first off, 1. If the Game Master goes first, always in your turn order or your initiative, and everybody else, all your players are just going, higgledy-piggledy, how they all organise themselves. Here's your problem. If you're playing a D20 system, you're playing Dungeons and Dragons, you're going to have some players who just consider this, malpractice. They might even consider it malpractice by a Game Master or Dungeon Master. They're going to frown upon it. They're going to see it as unfair. And the reason being is, 1, they're not used to that system. They're used to the D20 system and initiative. They're also got a whole lot of features that are dependent on turn order. They are trying to vie to go first because of the way that the game is set up. And that is a giant hassle, okay? So the only time I think you should decide to have a system where the Game Master goes first is when you're dealing with high fantasy or sort of superhero play where it's not very deadly, where the chances of characters going down and dying quickly aren't likely. It's probably better to be used in those sort of systems. You also got to make sure you got players who are on board. If you're going to try to do this, do it with completely new people who have never played Dungeons and Dragons or a role-playing game before, where they're not used to, they don't have any preconceived ideas about how initiative works. Now, if you're dealing with a system where the players always go first and the Game Master goes last, this is much easier to sell. You can sell that idea to your players and your group so much easier when you're the Game Master. You'll probably have no issue with anybody at the table when you do something like this. The only problem is it's not going to work, okay, if you have a sort of a, I guess what's the best way to describe it? If your monsters or your creatures don't have some way of surviving the first onslaught. If you're dealing with a really deadly game, it's probably fine to use it there. If you're dealing with a game where the players' characters are really powerful, it's really not going to work. Because if you've ever played modern Dungeons and Dragons, you'll find that, particularly 5e, you're only getting between 1 and 3 rounds and then it's over. Like literally, you could have 1 round and it's over. You might even get 3/4 of a round. So that means that the Game Master will probably never get to do, or Dungeon Master will never get to do anything with their monsters and creatures. But you don't get a lot of blowback from players about using a system like that. But it does put you as the Game Master in an awkward situation, because you're going to have to add more health or hit points to your creatures and monsters and your NPCs, because they're going to get absolutely steamrolled otherwise. So yeah, not the best thing. And then the last, now I want to go back to chat. I can see people are commenting, but I want to go back to one more system that I'm going to suggest. And it's up to you whether you like this or not. I'm not too worried about it myself. But and that is we don't worry about this. We're going to take this away. That means nothing anymore. In fact, turn order is so unimportant. Now, it only works in a system where you don't have turn-based abilities. The idea being that everybody will take their turn and it's any kind of order. It doesn't really matter whether you go first or second or third. Ultimately, it means nothing for that round of combat. So you can have something like this, but ultimately it doesn't mean anything. Do you know why? Very simple. You don't have to roll. It's just you all go. It's because everybody gets to take their turn. So if your character or your monster gets knocked out or killed in the first round of combat, it doesn't matter because they don't go. It doesn't actually occur until they've taken their turn. That means that it's possible for the barbarian to fight the troll, do a killing blow, and for the troll to also do a killing blow on the barbarian at the same time. They could kill each other. Okay, you make your attack roll for your barbarian with your 20-sided dice or whatever the dice you are using, and you grab your 12-sided dice and you roll it. You make your attack, and the blow is going to kill the troll, the venom troll. But of course, guess what? It's not over yet, because your troll is also going to make an attack with whatever dice they get. Say, I don't know what that's going to be. So get your 12-sided dice, you make your attack, and it also kills basically the barbarian. They both get to make the attacks. They both get to do damage. They both get to do whatever effects they might have. But it doesn't actually occur to the very end of the round. Now, for those of you who might be familiar with this, because I believe that Professor Dungeon Master from the Dungeon Craft channel talks about this all the time, is a system that he uses. It's actually very, very smart. It's another variation on group initiative, for those of you who are not familiar with group initiative. Now, the great thing about this is you don't have to ever worry about rolling initiative. You don't have to worry about calculating anything, and you're never taking anything away from anybody. You're not taking anything really away from the players. They will always get to do something on that round, and you're not taking anything away from the game master and the monsters. They will always be able to do something cool as well. And then everything is resolved at the end. And it kind of makes much more sense, because apparently, a round is supposed to have everything happening at the same time, rather than it be a sequential order. You might be saying, well, it's going to be incredibly difficult to contend with if we're dealing with abilities that have that turn order thing, where it's really important where we're placed in the initiative or in the turn order. And yes, I would agree. If you've got a system that's really reliant on the effect lasts for one round, and then it's going to end at the end of your next turn, then of course, okay, hang on, but I'm already down. But the same thing applies to the monsters. And yes, the monsters and the NPCs that your game master are running probably have fewer turn-based features than your player characters. But I still think it's probably one of the smartest ways of running a battle. It's not how I run my combat. I run my combat very differently. My approach to initiative, I've presented on the channel before, and I'm happy to show people what I do in a second if you want me to. It's not that complicated, and I've been using it for a while, and my players are pretty familiar with how I approach it. Let's have a look at chat though. Itchy, Fred, I was excited to see you made a Mercy Monk video. I watched it today. I like the subclass. I actually quite like the Mercy Monk. Again, as you know, Itchy, I'm not you may know, I'm not a huge fan of subclasses or archetypes in Dungeons and Dragons 5e. I feel like they are like a half a class, They're like the lost child, and I feel like they're lazy for Wizards of the Coast. They don't have to go to quite so much work. They don't have to put quite so much in their books. I'm not a huge fan, but the Mercy Monk, it's got some ideas there that are quite cool. I usually like to alternate creature, PC, creature. That way the enemies will get some actions, and the DM can't just mob the PCs and take take one out. Yeah, I mean, that's another issue with the, if you have the game master going first, it's possible for the players to wind up getting sort of smashed up pretty badly. But I mean, the same thing applies to the monsters as well. You're trying to get that nice little balance in between, right? And I'm not suggesting that game balance should exist in a role-playing game. Okay, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you what I do at my table. I've shown people this before, and you will decide whether you like it or you hate it. It's very simple. I still use initiative, and I still roll a 20-sided dice. I only do this once. I only get them to roll initiative for all the battles for my game session once, and we do it at the beginning of the game session. So each person will roll initiative. And so I'm going to not do that right now. Ultimately, it'll take too long. But the idea being is that as long as a group of players are in together, it's really just the position of where the game master's turn is going to be. Okay, wizard. If that is the only thing I need to contend with, which is where is my game master or dungeon master positioned within the group as an overall, then that's the only thing I need to contend myself with. It means that the order and position of the player characters is completely unimportant outside of where they're positioned with the game master. And you can see I'm rolling initiatives right now. And I do this before, so as people are coming into the group, and before we even start the game, I'm getting them to roll initiative, and I'm doing the same thing with my monsters or my creatures. So we have a 23 here for the rogue, so you're probably going first. We have a 20 for the game master, and we have a 20 for the fighter, because if we add up those. Now, you're probably thinking, so what happens if you get a tie? I'm going to explain that, don't worry. And then our last one is going to be our cleric, because they only got 11, and the fighter got and the wizard got a 18. So there's my turn order for the entire game session. There it is. Now you're probably wondering, so what happens if there is a tie between the game master and one of the players? And this is how I roll it. Game master always goes first. Game master. There's no roll off. We do not roll off. I do not roll off between myself and the other player. That's it. And so this is how I would run it. I would say, rogue, you're getting to go first. Now, if the person who actually initiated the battle, if the person who actually initiated the battle was the rogue, they would get to go first. If it was in fact the wizard decided to cast fireball, then I would have them do their thing first. If they initiated the fight rather than myself or anybody else in the group, they decide, I cast fireball. Boom, big fireball, they take their turn. But they're down here, right? That doesn't make sense. Remember, we try not to break the narrative, and this is why I do it this way, so it doesn't break the narrative, and it makes a lot more sense for me. Then I go through the turn order. Okay, rogue, it's your turn. And I wait for them to take their turn. They take their turn, they do what they need to do. Then I go down to my turn, which is the game master. I take my turn. Do whatever I need to do. Okay? Then I say to the fighter and the cleric, not the wizard in this case, because they were initiators. They actually initiated the fight. I'll say to the fighter and the cleric, it's your turn. You decide who's going to go first. Tell me what you're going to do. Roll some dice. It's very, very quick. Now, if we have a situation where it's not clear who initiated the fight, but there's going to be a fight, then I would just run it like this. Rogue takes their turn. When they're finished, I take my turn as the game master, and then when it's time for the other three at the bottom here, they'll take their turn together as a group. And they'll decide who's going to go first, who is faster, whoever makes a decision quicker, that's who goes first. And I never change that order for my game session. It just stays like that. And you're probably thinking, Fred, are you insane? Well, what I find is that the game master, in terms of their position, generally doesn't change that much unless I'm using a different monster. I can, if I want, move that around, but the players are essentially locked in their position. And it solves a lot of problems. I don't have to wait for them to roll dice. I don't have to put up with the player paralysis issue that I've had many times. I don't have to worry about those strange and weird situations that arise where we have somebody who drew their sword and tried to swing at somebody's head, and apparently they're actually going last, yet they're the one who started the fight in the first place. And I don't have to make up some sort of convoluted reason like, oh, no, the reason that, even though you started the fight and you drew your sword, you didn't actually have enough time to respond. You didn't react fast enough to actually swing at the orc. That's why you're going last and everybody else is going first. I mean, you can say it, but it's so contrived. So I've avoided that for years, and that's how I do it. Generally, what has been the response by my players for a system like that? It is a variation of many different things you might have noticed. It's things that I've talked about today. Almost everybody likes it. Almost everybody likes it. I think there's one person in my group who struggles. But they are very stuck in their ways in terms of they will only do it the way that it's standardized in the player's handbook for any game system. If you're not playing exactly rules as written, they just cannot cope. But this person is, they are the exception. Everybody else works really well. What is the end result on using a system that way? I've found is that if I'm playing a game of Dungeons and Dragons 5e from about level 1 through to level 10, the average time span for a fight is between 1 and 5 minutes. From beginning to finish, I'm serious, between 1 and 5 minutes, it's over. So more complicated battles that take a lot more rounds, it's going to be more closer to the 5-minute end. The higher the level it gets, the more dice they're rolling, the more decisions they're making, the more information they're having to present to me, the longer it takes. But between 1 and 5 minutes is my normal time. The end result is it's possible for me to, if I want to, I can have 3 or 4 fights or battles in my game session that is about 3 hours long, which actually equates to more like, if we're serious about it, it's actually more like 2.5 hours to 2 hours and 15 minutes because of break time and everybody taking time to come into the game session in the first place. Everybody sort of shows up half an hour late sometimes. So, if I only got about 2.5 hours to 2 hours and 15 minutes, I can still get 3 battles in, maybe even 4, and the maximum time I spent actually in conducting those battles, maximum time is probably about 20 minutes if I have 4 battles, 15 minutes maximum if I have 3 battles, which means that the vast majority of my time is spent exploring, that's what they're doing, and role play, interacting, communicating with monsters and other NPCs. And that's what I want. And I love fights, but I hate slow fights, and I hate waiting for things to resolve themselves. I want it fast and furious, and that's why I do it that way. And if more of you, if you can take control of how your turn order works in your games, you're going to feel much better about the whole process, whatever system you use. Okay. Now, if I'm running a game table and I have 10 to 13 players at my table, I always go around anti-clockwise or clockwise. Always do that. And I always make it clear to the people at the table as like, if you don't like that, leave the table. Because this is how I'm going to manage the table. And you know what the response has been almost always from every player at the table? Is they totally get it. They totally get it. I don't need to have a 2-minute timer for my players. I don't have to have hourglasses out when I run it with using a group initiative system. I don't have to worry about all that sort of stuff if I pre-roll and just use the same order for every single battle, because it isn't necessary. Because all I say is, okay, rogue, I'll fighter, take your turn. What are you going to do? I'm going to swing my sword and try to hit them. I say, roll your dice, next person. Wizard, cleric, what are you guys doing? And they'll tell me. And I say, okay, roll your dice, make that decision. Oh, you've made that decision, do that. And then once they're all making these decisions and they're calculating all their dice, all I'm doing is jotting down how much damage they do once they tell me whether they hit the thing or not. That's it. So I can actually do that calculation very, very quickly. Okay, what else have we got here? So Fred, you said here, including the 2-minute timer at the beginning of each combat round, my 9 players games tend to be under 5 minutes per combat round. Right, mainly because of you're not your turn, let the other guy play his PC. Yeah, so I've played Dungeons and Dragons 4E where it was not uncommon to have 2 hours to 3 hours in a fight. I'm never going back to that. If you want to play the game that way, that's up to you. But I am not willing to play that way. I have 5 players in my group. If you have 9 players in your group, it's going to be a lot harder. Do you know what I mean? I've seen other DMs games take 2 hours a combat round for each 4-player game. For a 4-player game, yeah. Look, I would not be surprised. Depending on the game system, this is why I will not play. I would not go and play 4E again or 3.5. I certainly have no desire to play Pathfinder First Ed Edition or Second Ed Edition because I feel like the majority of the game is going to wind up waiting for people to make decisions, and it just won't move fast enough for me, and I will get bored. It's really bad when I get bored at the table because I can. It's not just about I just sit back and do nothing. I might do something really, really terrible because I'm an instigator. The end result is, though, I find that the group are quite satisfied with their game sessions at the end because they got to get lots of exploration in, lots of role play, and they still got to do lots of combat, but it was really fast. I think one of the most common things I hear from the individual who dislikes me using initiative this way is, but I just had my turn. And I said, yes, but you've had your turn and we've actually rolled around, and they said, yeah, but that's like 30 seconds ago. And I'm like, well, yeah, but everything's moving a lot faster. Everybody's decided what they're doing. They've all rolled their dice. It's now your turn. Make a decision, roll some dice. Okay? So, anyway, I'm going to end this poll. So we're going to probably return, and I'm going to talk a lot more about inspiration, or probably actually how to calculate and do various types of attacks. But I don't want to do any more today. I'm actually bushed. This week has been really, really hard for me, and tomorrow I'm doing Morkbork or Merkbork. So for those of you who don't know what Morkbork or Merkbork is, I will at least sort of show you and indicate, because I probably should. I'm going to be doing a review tomorrow. Tomorrow is going to be Morkbork Day or Merkborky Day for me. So it's described as a doom metal or death metal role-playing game. And so I'll do a review tomorrow as part of my feature at the end of the week. I'm putting up Mazes and Monsters. This is the second draft that I've written. As I said, it's very much stripped back. It's free. You don't have to pay for it on Patreon. You do not need to be a patron to get access to it. It's completely free, okay? So let me just show you Morkbork or Merkbork, so you've got an idea. Because there's quite a lot. This is a double feature tomorrow. You won't be just getting me. We've organised quite a lot at the same time. So if I can just find... Yeah, here we go. Free League Publishing. That's the one I want. There we go. This is the one. So let me just share the screen so you can see. No, I don't want no cookies for you. Cookies are out. And here's the screen. Now, I've been trying to learn more and more game systems over time. I'm getting there. Slowly but surely, I'm learning more and more game systems and will present more and more game systems as I learn how to play them. So this is Morkbork or Merkbork. Okay. Doom metal album of a game. So as you can see, it looks a little odd. It's digest size in terms of the book itself. It's got a whole lot of stuff in here. Its artwork is kind of outrageous, and its art style is bizarre. And it's supposed to be a rules light game. And so I'm going to review this game. tomorrow. But it's not the only thing I'm going to do. I've organised for some YouTubers to play Mork Bork or Merk Borky tomorrow as well. So first I'll do the review, and then about an hour later we'll do a live stream where we do a session 0 and we build a Mork Bork or Merk Borky character together in this Game Master Roundtable. It'll be on Wally DM's channel, and it will have a number of people you're aware of, and we've managed to get some famous people along, some relatively famous individuals to come along, and we're going to do the session 0. I understand that our game master for this is going to be, it's just Josiah, Dungeon Dad. For those of you who know Dungeon Dad, Josiah, he does Monster Lore. He's going to be running the game. He'll be running the session 0. He's told me that character creation's very, very quick. So we will make the characters, and then we'll probably also play as well tomorrow. The time, it's going to be 12 p.m. for me in New Zealand, but it will be, I believe it's 5 p.m. if you were in Los Angeles or Pacific Daylight Time. If it's Mountain Daylight Time, it'll be 6 p.m. tomorrow. If it's Chicago, which is Central Daylight Time, it'll be 7 p.m. And if you're in Miami or Florida, that's the Eastern Daylight Time, it'll be 8 p.m. tomorrow. And so that's what we've decided to do. We're going to run that, and we're going to come back. We will do another session after that. So there'll be 2 weeks of it. There's going to be a bit of a break because we have Gen Con, and there's a few people going off to Gen Con very shortly. So we've got to give them time to get back from and recover from Gen Con. I believe Josiah, Dungeon Dad, is going to have to contend with the worst aspects of that. So prepare, cook, and survive. I want to warn you, and Prepare, Cook, and Survive is the person who actually sent me the book. I did not buy this book, and it was actually sent to me. Yes, Fred, it's very bad when the DM gets bored. They'd like to make things happen. Exactly. So I'm going to warn you now, if you have never seen what I'm like when I review a product, I am very honest. So if I think there is a problem and I don't like something, I say it. And I thought I was going to get to say just really good things about this book, but I don't just have really good things to say about this book. I'm probably going to be quite ruthless with this book, actually, considering what I came across. So don't feel too bad, Prepare, Cook, and Survive, if I roast it, because, as I said, I'm not just reading the book and reviewing it. I'm also going to learn how to play a character, and I'm also going to play the game as well, but I'll be doing that after the review, so maybe my opinion will change, or maybe it won't. But I was trying to decide, should I do the review after I have played the game? And in the end, I decided that no, I don't want to do that. I want Mork Bork or Merk Bork to get my review and impression based off what I can see and read and understand of the game. My first impressions. And then play the game and build characters. It also means that, provided it is easy for me to do this, I will build Mork Bork or Merk Borky characters on the channel at some point. Probably after I've done some Pathfinder 2E and a bit of Beck Me Dungeons and Dragons. We'll probably do some Mork Bork or Merk Borky character creation in the future. I'm going to put up a link to Wally's channel so you can go and find the link for that. So if you're wondering, he has actually already scheduled it, so it's right there. Okay. And that's it. So as I said, next week we're going to be dealing with advanced sort of game rules. I'm not going to come back to basic combat mechanics for another 3 weeks or 4 weeks. So next week will be complex combat mechanics, things that I think you might be interested in, that you might want to use. And my target is inspiration, probably talking about inspiration, or it might wind up being cover rules. Cover rules are a giant mess, so looking at that might be a good idea. In any case, thank you for being here. I am going to go. Uh, I am tired. I'm losing my voice. So thank you to everybody who's been watching and listening. Thank you to my patrons who support me so I can keep running this program every single week. I do appreciate it. I want to thank you for taking part in the poll and commenting. So Prepare, Cook and Survive, Fred Hubber, putting forward your ideas, the Cax, Max, Big Kid, Luna. It really has been helpful to have you there commenting and responding. I do appreciate it. So wherever you are in the world, whether it be the morning, the afternoon, the night, or the wee early morning, please look after yourself, your family, and your friends. Be nice to your neighbours. And hey, till next time, keep rolling those 20s.